Today, I want to talk to you about a very important topic that you may encounter, especially early on in the curriculum and as you're trying to forge this learning partnership with your child, which is how to handle resistance to an activity that you might meet. Um, if you're just beginning to incorporate learning activities into your day or into your relationship with your child, that's especially when you might begin to see resistance to activities, although it's certainly possible to see resistance at any point in the process. But I want to reassure you that by focusing on a few key principles, you'll be able to forge a learning partnership with your child, a cooperative relationship around learning activities that will not completely but greatly reduce resistance to learning activities in the future, at least a particular kind of resistance. And so the first thing that I want to talk to you about when it comes to resistance is to one of the first steps that you should take when you have an activity planned or you invite your child to an activity and they don't want to do it, or there's frustration, resistance in any form, whether it's verbally or physically, they decide to run out of the room, like in whatever form it comes, the first thing that you want to do is to try to identify the reason or reasons behind the resistance. Because depending on where it's coming from, that's going to guide what steps you take to overcome it. And overcoming it doesn't always mean that the child peacefully complies. I'll explain all of that in a moment. So all these different places that resistance to an activity can come from, and this does not just apply to learning activities. It can apply to when you ask your child to brush their teeth or anything else that when you're dealing with your child over an activity. A lot of the time, it comes because this isn't part of your child's agenda. Your child doesn't necessarily see this activity as relevant or important to them, and it's kind of an interruption to whatever they're engrossed in at the moment. They may be playing with their favorite toys, they may be watching their favorite TV show, they may have other ideas about what they want to go and do. They don't understand why they should stop that and go and focus on this activity that you want them to come and do. So if that's the problem, this is where I talk about the importance of forming a cooperative relationship with your child. It's really quite unfair, if you think about it, to ask them to switch gears like that. I mean, we ourselves don't like to be interrupted in the middle of a pleasant activity for us, our favorite activity, to be asked to go and do something. If you were in the middle of your favorite television show or reading your favorite book or working on a hobby or a craft that you really enjoy, and then somebody told you had to go wash the dishes right now, you would probably be a little bit resistant to it. And so a big part of meeting resistance and overcoming it is to learn to see the experience from your child's perspective and what's going on, and to pick your timing on these activities. One thing that really helps with this is developing transitions, to give your child a warning that, okay, in 5 minutes, we're going to clean up these toys and we're going to go on to a different activity, and sort of forecasting for them what's ahead and giving them that opportunity to transition between activities. So that's a common way of overcoming this. Another way is simply just to learn and to work with your child's natural rhythms. Some children are more inclined to be cooperative or to be ready to do certain things at different times of the day. As a writer myself, I know that my time that's optimal for writing is first thing in the morning, and that I really need to work with that. If I'm trying to do it late in the day, then it's like I'm not at my best and I really don't want to do it and I don't feel like it. And your children have all of these same patterns and rhythms to what they're up for and when that you do. And so this is another part of what I mean by just forming this cooperative relationship with your child, is that as you incorporate intentionally more and more of these learning activities, you will also learn your child's natural rhythms and patterns for when they are most up for certain activities and when they're most able to engage. And your child may be really inclined to focus on like fine motor skills in the morning and really eager to sit down at the table and do some of those activities in the morning. But towards the end of the day, they may prefer, that's when reading time is. And so learning to work with that. Children don't always follow our agendas. We can have the best laid plans in the world. And it's wise to anticipate that your children aren't necessarily going to share that same plan. And so coming into it with a spirit of expecting that and of willing to compromise and of willing to change plans and be flexible is just going to make everybody happier. It's going to make the experience better. It's going to help build that partnership with your child, and it's going to get the ultimate goal. It's going to accomplish that better too, which is for your child to learn these objectives. And so learning to work with your child on that instead of just rigorously enforcing our own schedule is definitely the smoothest and optimal way to achieve that. So transitioning from one activity to another, or just being engrossed in a certain activity, is definitely one cause of resistance, and a fairly easy one to overcome if you can be flexible. Another way to accomplish that is to simply look at the objective that you're trying to accomplish with the activity. So for instance, if it's time for a counting activity and you had originally planned to have your child come to the table and do a worksheet or come into the kitchen and do a kitchen activity with counting, but your child is in the middle of playing with dinosaurs and that's their favorite thing to do, and they really do not want to come away from that to engage in this activity that you've set up. Well, the easiest way around that is to incorporate the objective into what they're already doing. Be flexible about how you accomplish the objective. And one of the things we try to do in this curriculum is to offer a variety of activities throughout the week for an objective, so that you can kind of pick and choose. Maybe one thing will fit into your schedule better on one day, or maybe one thing is simply more appealing to your child on that day. And you can be flexible in that way and just simply choose a different activity, or come and sit with them on the floor with the dinosaurs and use the dinosaurs as the counting activity. Or if the objective is that you're going to practice the sound of the letter B, then come and sit with your child with the dinosaurs and come up with names for the dinosaurs that start with a B and practice the sound of the letter B that way. And so you're still accomplishing the objective. You're just being flexible about the activity and the way that you go about it. That is another fantastic way to overcome resistance. You're not making it a fight. You're not insisting that your child come and do the exact thing you had planned at the exact moment that you had planned to do it, but you're still keeping in mind what is the real goal here. And the real goal is that learning objective and figuring out a creative way to accomplish it. Another method, if your child is having none of that, is to expand the goal even further and say, okay, well, maybe we can't accomplish this objective right now, but we can still accomplish some objective. We can have some sort of learning time now, even if it's accomplishing a different objective. And so if you're continuing to meet resistance with your efforts to modify the activity and accomplish the same objective, then it may be time to expand your horizons a little bit more and say, okay, we're just going to, let's say it's reading time and your child does not feel like sitting down to listen quietly to a book. Well, then, okay, we're going to go outside and we're going to play hopscotch and we're going to count your jumps as you jump them, and we're going to let you get your energy out and do something very active since you do not feel like sitting and listening to a book right now, and we're just going to work on counting instead. And what you're doing there is you're trading objectives to accomplish what's working for your child at that moment. And you're still accomplishing your goal of having a learning experience with your child at that time. So flexibility is key to overcoming resistance. That's another fantastic way to overcome it and to work around it. Sometimes though, that doesn't work. And this is where it can be as simple as, is your child tired and do they need a nap? Do they need a snack? Make sure that all of those basic needs are taken care of before you're asking them to engage in a learning activity. And sometimes it really is just that simple. Other times you may feel like you're running into a harder wall than that, where even your attempts to sit down and play with the dinosaurs and count them, your child doesn't seem to want any of that either. They don't want your participation, or they can almost sense that you're trying to make this a learning experience and they're resistant even to that. And sometimes that's a different kind of resistance entirely, and it is sort of a resistance to this dynamic of a learning relationship. They haven't learned yet to have that cooperation with you, or to see you in that role of kind of their guide and leader as far as learning goes. And that's a little more difficult to overcome. Maybe not more difficult, but longer term. That's going to require really forging this cooperative learning partnership relationship with your child. A lot of times what's going on when you see that type of resistance is that your child doesn't necessarily feel safe taking learning risks. This could be because they feel they may just innately be a little bit of a perfectionist and they're afraid that they're going to get it wrong. That could be from internal pressure, like that's just their personality. Some people have that sort of type A personality, even little children, where they are very hard on themselves if they get something wrong, and attempting a learning activity that's something new and that they're not familiar with is a risk. Sometimes that pressure comes from externally. If they've been criticized by parents, siblings, preschool teachers for getting something wrong, that can be a big weight, and it can make children very afraid to take the risk of answering a question or trying an activity and not doing it perfectly. If they're afraid that that's going to cause frustration, or they're going to, be corrected for that. And that is that does take a little bit more time to solve. The solution to that is to be endlessly positive and endlessly praising, meaningful praise of their efforts. We need to acknowledge with our children how difficult this is. Learning new things, learning letters and sounds and numbers, even though it is the most simple and basic of tasks to us, is obviously tremendous work to little children who are learning this for the first time. Some of them are going to struggle with it more than others, but what is helpful is to acknowledge that this is work for them. And if nothing else, you can thank them for that effort and that work of learning. And it's a habit that I would get into every single time you engage in a learning activity with your child, no matter whether they ace it and do it perfectly, or whether they make a mistake on every letter sound that they try to make, is that you thank them for the effort of having tried and participated, and that you acknowledge, wow, this is really hard work and you did your best and you put so much effort into that, and just thank you for working on this with me and spending this time with me, and I can't wait to do it again next time with you, and praising them and thanking them for the work of learning. And then once you've determined that maybe this is a factor in resistance, that risk-taking is a factor, you can really begin to focus on that with the praise, with making sure that you're not critical of their efforts, and invite them to sort of lower risk activities. Maybe you start with an activity that they have some kind of familiarity with, and then you build from there. Maybe you can put off activities that, if they in particular struggle with, for instance, numbers. You could put that off for a little bit and focus on letters, focus on reading. It's okay to move objectives around and to take a break, to focus on things that feel a little lower risk to your child and really build their confidence in that way before you tackle something that feels particularly challenging for them. Let's see. Another thing that you can do to really overcome resistance is to not really require their participation at all. This is one that works in my experience almost every single time on some level, is to simply model the activity yourself. If your child doesn't want to count the cars that you've lined up for them to count, then simply you do it for them. Offer it as an invitation, and if they refuse, simply you do it. And this does a couple of things. First of all, they're still getting that learning. They're learning just by listening to you do it. Children are programmed to learn by observation. And so the fact that they're not doing it themselves shouldn't get you that upset. They will learn so much just from hearing you do it. And what they'll also learn is that it's okay to take that risk. They may take the 20th time of listening to you count the cars, but eventually they'll feel familiar enough with it, more than likely, to then join in or to accept your invitation for them to do it as well. So don't be afraid to just model the activity, invite your child, and if you meet resistance to the activity, say, okay, I understand that you really don't want to do this right now. I'm going to do it though. And show them, without exaggeration, you don't want to look fake, but show them how, pleasant an experience it can be. Kids are great at spotting fakes. You don't want to oversell it like it's the funnest thing in the world. But by modeling the activity and doing that over and over if necessary, they are taking in that information, they're still learning, and more than likely, they will eventually join the activity. The other thing that this strategy is accomplishing is a really good lesson in boundary setting. What it's doing is showing them, instead of trying to force them to engage in the activity, it's teaching them that through modeling, through your own example, that you can't control what other people do. You can only control what you do. You're only in charge of yourself and your own actions. And so by not trying to force them to engage in the activity and simply saying, okay, you're respecting their wish to not do it, and instead you're going to do it yourself, you are modeling for your child how to respect other people and their boundaries and what other people don't want to do. So combining, that's a good social emotional learning moment that arises out of a circumstance of resistance where, oh my goodness, we're not, I went to all this trouble to set up this activity and it's time for us to do this and I really want to check it off my to-do list today, but my child doesn't want any of it. And instead, you're going to have a learning moment about social emotional behavior and use that as a modeling experience and still accomplish the counting objective too, because they're still going to hear you do it and they're still going to pick up information from that. And so that's a fantastic way to combat resistance. Respecting them in that way and their feelings, that's the other thing that I would mention, is to never try to talk your child out of their feelings about something, and to really allow them to own those feelings. So, for example, when you offer an invitation to your child for an activity, and they say they don't want to do it, oh, I hate that. But they didn't hate it last week, maybe. I mean, it's very tempting to say, oh, no, you don't. You love this. But I would refrain from trying to tell your children what their feelings are and aren't. It may feel like it's serving your purposes at that moment, and maybe they did love it last week, but maybe their feelings have changed. We all have that with different things. Even we adults, our feelings can change about an activity, or we simply don't feel like it at the moment. And you can certainly remind them that, oh, remember last week we colored and you really enjoyed that activity, but I hear you saying that you don't feel like doing it right now. So, okay, I'm going to color my coloring page, and if you change your mind and decide that you want to come and color yours, then please do, or maybe we can try it again later. It's another very valuable social emotional lesson, and it also goes such a long way to forming that cooperative learning partnership with your child, where then they trust you. They trust you to respect their feelings, they trust you to believe what they say, and they're going to be all that much more likely to try new things and to engage in new activities with you in the future, rather than trying to talk them out of their feelings. Usually just results in them digging their heels in further. So by looking at all the different reasons why your child may be resistant to an activity, you can usually find a path forward to accomplish either the objective that you'd originally intended to accomplish or a different type of learning moment, depending upon what the reason for the resistance is. And if nothing else, by working with your child through that difficult moment, even if you're not accomplishing that learning objective that you intended, you are working on that relationship with your child, which will pay off in the end more than any single learning objective that you might have had planned for that moment, because it's going to lay that foundation for ease in the future of being able to sit down with your child on a learning activity that may be very challenging for them or very difficult for them, or asking them to do something new and to take a learning risk, and to having them trust you in that experience and feel safe to open up and to engage with that activity for the future. So that's what you're doing. You're laying the foundation here. And that's not always easy, and there is often resistance, especially at first. But by keeping these few principles in mind, then you can greatly reduce that in the future. We'll still all have our resistant moments in the future. I continue to, even with my older children. But I continue to be resistant to things myself. I mean, does that ever really, really end? It's just, how do we tackle it when we meet that resistance is the question. The last thing that I encourage parents to think about when they meet resistance with their children and they're just butting heads and hitting a brick wall with a particular learning activity, their child doesn't want to have anything to do with learning letter sounds or whatever it is. And sometimes it's a big stone wall that, isn't just for a day, but you feel like you continue to run into day after day. And one of the things that I encourage parents to think about is not just, well, why is the child resistant, but to really assess their own feelings, because we tend to get worked up when this happens. Like, they're not listening to me. It can be really emotional on us when we meet this resistance with our child, especially if it continues to happen over and over. And I encourage parents to self-assess as to what are they feeling over that conflict. And a lot of times it's frustration that they're not being listened to, and that the child is either disobeying or flatly refusing to engage with a certain activity. And a lot of it is usually surrounding fear. It's that, well, if my child doesn't listen about this, they're not going to listen about anything else. Or my child isn't going to be ready for kindergarten if they don't learn this. Or if they don't learn to listen when it's time to do something, then how are they going to deal with school, or how are they going to deal with when a teacher asks them to do something? These are all valid questions and concerns and fears. But usually when we dissect them for ourselves and figure out what's bothering us about this conflict with our child and where's this fear really rooted, we can usually help ourselves to calm down and to really assess the situation for what it is in the moment, rather than letting ourselves get emotionally worked up about it and making it into a bigger deal than it is. A lot of times it's like, okay, well, why do I really feel the need to force the situation with this activity today? Why do I feel so emotional about it? And it's that, well, I feel like, it could be, you feel like you haven't done many learning activities lately with your child, and I feel like we're behind, and like I really wanted to accomplish something today. This is what I set out to accomplish, and I'm going to feel like the day is a failure if I don't. Well, then once you recognize that that's what's driving your insistence upon this activity at this moment, you can take a step back and realize, okay, my child is still going to be ready for kindergarten if we don't do this activity today. What can I substitute instead that I can feel like we've had a nice learning moment and I can still feel like this day is a success, but that I don't need to have this conflict with my child over this activity? So assessing yourself is just as important as assessing the reason for the resistance in your child. And it's by doing those two things, you can usually almost always find a way to come together in some way for a positive learning experience, even if it's not accomplishing the activity or the objective that you originally set out to do. I hope some of this has been helpful, and I'll talk to you next time.